We are in the midst of one of the most significant discussions of the synthesis of yoga, where Sri Aurobindo is giving us a glimpse of what the divine consciousness and its divine life will be experienced as. You will recall in the earlier chapters, he described how one can ascend into an experience of utter oneness, in which everything is held in oneness. And then he says, from this universal oneness, with this new consciousness, if we are to possess perfectly the world from this new consciousness, then we have to know each thing in the way the divine knows it. And the divine knows each thing as an absolute. Everything is the divine absolute expressing itself. And we have to know, therefore, each thing, each experience, each object as a divine absolute. Now, this is setting for us first a rational understanding. But what would it mean in practice? And this is the discussion which followed. And here he makes two extraordinary statements. The first, that the absolute is everywhere. It has to be seen and found everywhere, in each object, in each thing, in all the relatives. It is the absolute which is present. Absolute with a capital A, meaning that absolute which normally we think is only beyond the universe, beyond manifestation. But it's actually everywhere, because everything is itself expressed. And the second extraordinary statement, which is like the obverse of this, he says, every finite is an infinite and has to be known and sensed in its intrinsic infiniteness, as well as its surface finite appearance. So the reality of this world, as the divine sees it, not only that everything is itself absolute, but every finite appearance actually is an infinite. It's not represents an infinite, but is an infinite. And we should be able to see that infinite as well as the appearance of the finite. Meaning between the two, finite and infinite, the finite appearance is an appearance. The infinity which it holds, which it expresses, which it is the reality. And that's how the divine sees it, because that's how the divine has imaged himself in everything. And that was the point he made. In that experience, he says, we have to first of all know the whole world in this way, and every object in the world in this way. Such would be the nature of the divine life. Now you will see today in the popular discourse, in the New Age communities and philosophies or practices, a lot of talk about divinization of life, because somehow that idea has seized human beings. If you go back barely 50 years ago, everybody spoke of divine and life as separate. Now it is fashionable to speak of spirituality in life, divinizing life, and things like that. But if you probe behind the words, you will find the idea that people carry is very different. The idea is, well, you will still have your normal life, and into it there will be a little bit of devotion, or some sense of the sacred presence in things, or everything will be somehow raised and made a little more beautiful, a little more divine. So, the concept of divine life or divinization of life is nothing but an existing life experience a little bit lifted, a little bit more beautiful or sacred. But Sri Aurobindo's concept, or Sri Aurobindo has set for us an ideal which is radically different. It is to experience the world and every object in the world the way the divine experiences it. To share in the divine vision, the divine experience, the divine touch, and the divine play as the divine experiences it. That would be our concept of divine life. And this is way beyond anything which is even conceived of in humanity today. Here, in this description, we get a glimpse of it. When the divine looks at the flower, it sees here the absolute. It sees here the infinite. Because this flower is an expression of the divine himself, representing himself as flower, but the whole of the divine appearing as flower. And so, in that experience, not only the beyond, but all here. Not only the totality, the all in its mass, but each thing in the all becomes to us our self, God, the absolute and infinite, Satchidananda. So he's given 4 perspectives. First of all, this flower is not other, it is myself. Not just a projection or a reflection of myself, not just some essential part of me that I share with the flower, but it is me entirely. And everything we experience, everything we touch in the divine life is me entirely. So first it is myself, and it is the most subjective experience. A step further and we discover it is, what is that self? It is God. It is the one who has become everything. It is that which is not only my truth, but also for each object. The third level of the experience deepening, and he uses 2 words, the absolute and infinite, A capital, I capital. Meaning the absolute here is not a mental idea, but the experience of that which we knew outside, beyond all manifestation, beyond all relativity. And the infinite, capital I, is not just the way the mind conceives it, but it is the presence which is itself beyond all description, beyond all limits. And it is not only a spatial infinity, it is not only a timeless or transcendence of time, it is infinite beyond all possibilities of conception. Meaning all possibilities are present, pouring through, and still it is never finished. So this capital I infinite and capital A absolute carry in them a very important idea that it is everything that can be, all of that pouring through, which still not exhaust that which is waiting to emerge. And it is that whole infinite possibility. It is the containing of everything that can ever be and beyond all descriptions of what can be. It is that which is the infinite and absolute. That which we normally know to be out there on the edge or beyond creation. That is right here in everything, as everything. And this is how the divine sees. And from here, there is a fourth step of the experience, Satchidananda. It is the all real, all consciousness, all force, all knowledge, all bliss, all love as the divine. And that is what each object is. When we meet the flower, it is we as mind meeting flower as form. And my mind can study the shape. But the reality behind this appearance is me is only a pale reflection of the divine himself present. Meeting what? On the other side, the divine himself present. It is Satchidananda here meeting Satchidananda in this form, and Satchidananda experiencing always in the relationship the real Sat, the utter consciousness and power of consciousness, and the complete bliss of the relationship. And this is how the divine experiences every object in the world and the whole world as a whole. And it is in that consciousness that we have to live. And it is that which is the divine life that Sri Aurobindo sets for us. Anything short of this is incomplete or at best a step towards this. And of this experience, he says, this is the secret of complete delight in God's world. Complete satisfaction of the mind and heart and will. Complete liberation of the consciousness. And the emphasis on the word complete is the important thing here. It shows you that this is the finality to which we have to grow, or to which evolution and the whole cosmos is working towards. But this finality has three aspects. The first is the secret of complete delight in God's world. The world itself being an outburst of delight, meant to express and play out the delight. You are not truly participating in a divine life if you are not participating in that play of the delight. And that delight cannot be partial, it has to be complete to be the divine life. And the secret of the complete delight is this vision. So the first aspect is of the play of delight. The second aspect is of the complete satisfaction of the mind and heart and will. So you may live in the delight, you may experience the delight, but satisfaction is the subjective sense that everything is complete as is. There is no lack. There is nothing missing. In our human experience, however wonderful the experience, however tasty the food, however magical the relationship, however beautiful an object, however fulfilling our interactions with things, there is always the sense that something more is possible or something is missing. And therefore, however complete it may seem, somewhere inside us we know, and there is a dissatisfaction, which is good, which is necessary, because it acts as a goad eventually to say, now I'm bored, I need something more, the thing which was missing. But at what point do you know that your experience is complete with nothing missing? When you experience in this way the completeness of the divine in each object, in each interaction. And therefore he says, this is the secret of complete satisfaction of the mind and heart and will. These are the three components of our personality which are the primary drives of dissatisfaction, or to put it in a more positive term, the primary drives towards greater satisfaction or completeness. In the whole evolution, these are the three impulses which drive us. in the one of the traditional invocations to the Divine Mother in Lalita Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of the Divine Mother, she is described as three powers: Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti. Shakti means the power, the energy. Ichha is the desire, the wanting. The Jnana is the knowledge, the seeking. And Kriya is action, the will. These are the three things which in us are always pushing for more. You desire more from the heart. You want to know more. You want to do more. And from the moment we are born, or even before we are born, you will find these are the three impulses which are goading us. You withdraw these three, and we would be a lump no different from a stone, unable to or having no interest in movement or action. These are the three things which glimpse the incompleteness of the experience and are always pushing us towards complete satisfaction. And when do we have that complete satisfaction? Here. This experience is the secret of complete satisfaction. And the third aspect of the experience is complete liberation of the consciousness. In the very act of chasing satisfaction, partial or complete, we find ourselves attached. We find ourselves bound, tied down, because having got this, if I lose it, I will lose what I have, what little I have. I know I cannot have everything, but what little I have, I'm now afraid of losing. Or even while I have it, the satisfaction becomes less and less over time. So I'm already losing it. And what can you do? You are in a state of distress the moment you're attached to an object or a form. But if instead you begin to relate to the one as your self, God, the absolute and infinite, as Satchidananda, with every object and with the whole universe, with the world as a whole, you will find there is no attachment. Things come, things flow, things change in appearance, but that Satchidananda is always. And your relationship, your enjoyment of it is also on that base, infinite, absolute. And therefore, you are completely free in every experience, although having the most complete satisfaction and although having the full delight in God's world. And so the secret of delight in God's world, complete satisfaction of mind, heart, and will, complete liberation of the consciousness, and all human art, poetry, subjective and objective attempts to know are really seeking towards this experience. So here he has set for us the framework that now must be realized. In the context of the journey, as we have been studying it, this question comes after a person has already experienced the underlying oneness. And now we want to extend that oneness not only in some high state of consciousness, but in our day-to-day engagement. Not only experience oneness, but the absolute, the infinite, in every object, in everything. And it is this which will make for the completeness of the divine life. And so this is the challenge before us, to which Sri Aurobindo is leading, showing us the way. As a first step in the way, we will begin to perceive through the mind at least. Now remember, the whole thing could be done top down. One has reached the oneness and now you re-embrace the whole creation from above in the way the divine images himself. Or at the same time, as we read this with our mind, we can begin to reshape our mind's perception and begin to review things and realign this. He explains how it is possible, and this was the paragraph we read last time, it is possible to conceive of the absolute and the infinite as somewhere out there, beyond the universe. Now, why is he focusing on the absolute and the infinite? Because practically, the thing which allows you to glimpse the Satchidananda, to know it as God, is the perception that here, in this appearance of relative, is the concealed infinite absolute. Front is finite, appears relative, that's an appearance. Behind is the absolute and the infinite. And as we have seen, the absolute is everywhere. And the every finite is an infinite. Now, to be able to see that, that's the immediate focus. So, these are the two words you will find becoming extremely important in the text as we proceed. Can we experience everything as an absolute or an infinite? At the very least, concealed behind the appearance. Can we glimpse it? And here he says, we can start with the idea that that is only available out there. And the result will be you will obviously not find it here. You will say it is only out there. But, he says, if we start from the larger conception, a completer truth, and a wider experience open to us, we perceive that and he describes how we begin to see it. But the starting point has to be corrected. And what is the correction? He uses three phrases: larger conception, completer truth, wider experience open to us. He's saying it's right now open to us. It's not something which you have to wait until eventually someday you'll get it. So these three things are actually available to us as we are. First is larger conception. You can change your conception of the world, of the divine, of your relationship with the divine. And let's see what that correction is. Ordinarily, he said, and this was the paragraph last time, your discriminating mind tells you that only what is beyond all manifestation is absolute. Only the formless spirit is infinite. Only the timeless, spaceless, immutable self in rest is absolutely real. And if this is your starting point, well, it will be only that. Because anything which you glimpse, you will say it is not that, and you will keep eliminating it. So, what is this wider, larger conception that we have to start with? The larger conception is that yes, there is the absolute, there is the infinite, immutable, timeless, spaceless existence up there, but also the conscious force and delight of the divine being possessing the full pouring out of its powers. That also is absolute. So it is there behind doing nothing, static, but when it begins to pour out what? Remember, infinite possibilities, infinite energies, infinite forms, infinite experiences, infinite play of consciousness. Everything pours out blissfully as a delight. The power which contains all this, carries all this pouring out, that also is absolute. It's an example Sri Aurobindo gives. If you want to glimpse in the universe the sense of something absolute, well, look at that which holds the totality of the universe. Everything inside is changing, but in the total, nothing has changed. And so he is giving you this link point, the energy which is pouring out, the totality of it, the one who holds that energy, who is himself, herself pouring out, that also is absolute, possessing all its powers and qualities blissfully, creating itself. And it is the same absolute, the same infinite. So much the same that we can enjoy simultaneously, equally, the divine, timeless calm and peace, and the divine time possessing joy of activity, freely, infinitely, without bondage. Both we can embrace, that timeless, calm, and this time full, time possessing joy of activity. Who is possessing the same divine pouring out is the same absolute. If you have that, then you can turn like this and experience this also and possess this also. Of course, you will possess from a consciousness like that, which is embracing everything, but you will possess it. And this opens to you the possibility. If you have that consciousness embracing the whole movement, it can also embrace a part of the movement and experience here also the same absolute, because your consciousness holds that absolute, that infinite, and sees it expressing in this. Now, here you have the first correction, that the absolute and the infinite, while they are there, are also experienceable here. And if you begin to change this perspective of your mind, you will find that it is not so difficult, it's not so distant. The second change which we have to make, he says, a completer truth. The truth which we earlier, or at least the thinking mind came to as a conclusion, was that can only be there, outside somehow. And the moment it pours out, it has to be bound or is somehow limited to relativities and finites. But if you think about it, the completer truth is everything expressed here is that. If that is oneness which is indivisible, every form must be itself, cannot be divided, remember? If there is one divine consciousness which cannot be divided, everything it expresses must be the whole of itself. And therefore, it should be possible to perceive the whole of the divine, absolute, infinite, right here in the form that appears on the front as finite and relative. So, this is the second correction we make. There is a more complete truth. The partial truth is that that is there and this is not that. The completer truth is, yes, that can be experienced there, but this also is that, putting a different appearance, but it is still that. And then the third correction, and we start with a wider experience open to us. What's the experience here? Can you actually attune yourself to this idea and begin to see it, feel it, dwell on this? And immediately you will find a certain part of you begins to lean with a joy, with a certain delight towards this truth, and begins to feel it more and more close. It starts with a very simple exercise. You will recall Sri Aurobindo in the jail when he was put in solitary imprisonment. After a while, by some intervention, he was allowed to walk for a few minutes in the garden. But before that, only through the little window high above, he could see a patch of the sky and a little patch of the greenery of the tree. And the rest was barren, blank wall and a few ants wandering around. But he says when he got a chance to walk, he began to remember there the timeless verses of the Isha Upanishad, saying that all this is verily for the habitation of the Lord. Ishavasyam idam sarvam. Or all this is verily the divine. Sarvam khalu idam brahman. Dwelling on these verses, he said he would look at the trees, he would look at the different objects, beings, people, and try to imprint the vision of that all this is inhabited by the divine presence. All this is Brahman expressing itself in so many forms. And then he describes how gradually the truth of it began to become more and more vivid, more and more intense, until it began to fill him. And he felt this peace and joy caressing him, filling him, and all the rest. And eventually he could see it in the blank walls, in the ant wandering in his little cell, and so on. But the exercise itself is so simple. And what you see here in these three phrases is precisely the approach that we take. First, we make a correction, a larger conception, a completer truth, and from there it moves into a wider experience open to us. Spending a few minutes every day, or you're sitting having nothing to do, simply look at objects, simply look at people, look out of the window, or at what is before you, and dwell on the idea that all this is expression of the Brahman for the purpose of the play of its delight. And it's expressing as this and as that. You can sit in the marketplace, in the most disturbed space, and dwell on this idea. And after a while, you will find the things which are disturbing you in the market space, they begin to fade out. Instead, a kind of a wide, detached calm fills, and then a kind of a quiet joy begins to fill. And you see all these people doing their drama, and it's all like a movie, and you begin to laugh at it. Ah, this is so interesting, so much fun. And you perceive the play of the divine in this whole slow process of the play and the evolution. And all this is available to us in the wider experience open to us. If we take this, let's say, 3 steps, it begins the process. And the process leads to what eventually? The same absolute and infinite we can now begin to enjoy in equally the divine timeless calm and peace and the divine time possessing joy of activity, freely, infinitely, without bondage. And if this we can have there and generally here, he says we should be able to have this in everything and down to the every detail and every principle which is working in the universe, in the workings of this force. Remember, the point earlier was it is the same absolute embracing the force, but is it still embracing every working of the force inside? Every thread, every fiber of energy that moves to become the appearance of a separate object. And so this is the line where we have ended. So too we can have the same experience of all the principles of this activity, which in the immutable are self-contained and in a sense drawn in and concealed, in the cosmic are expressed and realize their infinite quality and capacity. So every principle working, and principle, we'll see the next one that he takes up, the most important principle is the principle of duality of soul and nature. Every principle also in its working, we should be able to glimpse this underlying infinity and absolute. But we will notice that the infinity and absolute immutability are withdrawn and concealed in that static part, and in the play, in the cosmos, they are released for the purpose of the play, they are expressed. But in their expression, they realize their infinite quality and capacity. Meaning every principle, every force, every power, every action is playing out its infinite quality and infinite capacity, and we will be able to glimpse that. So as a first step now, he takes the most important of these principles, and this unfolds over a couple of chapters. He will show you how this principle operates, why it is so important, and how even in the working of this principle, actually there is an underlying infinity and an absolute. Not just concealed, but they can actually be perceived. And this will be the rest of the journey. And then he will also look at other subsequent principles which derive from this. What he's doing effectively in the big picture across chapters, there was the ascent to the oneness of the Satchidananda. From there, the embracement of the whole multiplicity. And now, as you descend, you recognize how the one plays out through many aspects. What are the powers and principles it uses to construct or express itself as the cosmos. And at each point of its splitting or division of workings, you embrace and find the unity underlying and the infinity and the absoluteness in the working. So it's like a top down, you found the oneness there, and now you're stitching together the whole cosmos. Like a zip going down, zoop, everything is united down to the tiniest detail, the oneness, the absolute, the infinity experienced. That will be our experience of the divine life. So it's a bit top down, so he takes the most important principle there. The first of these principles in importance is the duality, which resolves itself into a unity. But what is the duality of? Of Purusa and Prakriti. Now you see, he says first of these principles in importance, because once you get this, you'll find everything else, all the other principles will be easier to resolve. Purusa and Prakriti, which we have had occasion to speak in the yoga of works, but which is of equal importance for the yoga of knowledge. So in the yoga of works, there was a discussion which we have not studied in these series of classes yet, but there's a discussion where the whole question of who is doing the work comes up. Let's say you are doing some activity. I am the one who plucked the flowers, who threaded them, arranged them in a garland, and placed them here. I did. But is it really so? If you observe more carefully, you notice that pretty much everything that's happening within you is being done. Well, let's look at inside. Who's breathing? I can say, I am breathing. Yes, you see, I breathe in, I breathe out at will. But actually, what do you do? Are you expanding the lungs? Are you taking in air? At best, you can say, I allow the breath to happen, or I do not interfere, or I will it, but the act of breathing is done by the muscles and the lungs. I am not muscles, I am not lungs. Who's pumping your heart? Not really me. If you start going into detail, you notice that most of what's happening is happening by some kind of automation. Who's thinking in the brain? You can say, I am moving the electricity from this cell to the other. No, that won't be true. I want to think, and the electricity moving happens, right? So which part is really me, and which part is the automatism of nature? If you begin this process of introspection, you'll find very quickly everything that's moving gets separated from you and is found to be part of the automatism of nature. And that's when the problem comes. When I'm thinking, when I think that I'm free, when I actually thought to pluck the flowers and thread them together to make the garland, did I really freely do it? Or was it the automatism of nature which triggered the thought, which triggered the will, which triggered the action of the muscles and made it happen? And the introspection which it leads to, which is part of that discussion, is actually everything that you do is a product of this process of nature. The only thing where you are able to intervene is to say, yes, I accept to do, or I withhold from doing. So the breathing is happening, I can withhold, hold your breath. Or I can let go and then it happens. I have thoughts, I have impulses, I can withhold the impulse and refuse to act to pluck the flower. And then another thought and another impulse comes. Instead of plucking the flower, I will do this, or I will do that, I will walk away, I will climb the tree. And I can accept or reject, accept or reject. What you realize in your experience of nature, of life, is a series of options are given to you. Not by you, by nature. All you can do is say yes or no to them. And if you reject an option, she pops immediately another option. And if you reject that, another. Even if you accept one, she pops you another variation of it, another choice. She keeps throwing these things at you, and if you do nothing, she leads you to do them anyway. The big difference between the ape and the human is that the ape does not have a conscious sense of volition refusing. Even its refusal is part of the machinery. How much of our refusal is really, truly refusal? So try to hold your breath. How long can you refuse to breathe? Eventually, nature hits you so hard, you cannot. And you actually realize your sense of I, which could choose, is itself very fragile, very superficial, and weak. Itself is a construct of nature. Is there at all a real I that can refuse or accept? And the introspection leads you to the recognition that, yes, behind those layers, and there are many layers of I with increasing freedom, but behind them all, there is some kind of an I that can actually say, I am none of these things. And I can accept to engage or I can refuse to engage, but the thing itself will continue to happen irrespective of your acceptance or not. And so here we have a clear separation between the consciousness which seems to participate, which seems to choose or enjoy, and then the activity itself, which is not its product. And it is this split, this division, this duality, which is referred to in the Yoga of Works. And it is critical to understand what is our true nature of freedom or of free will in action. Who is doing the action and how much of it is really you? And so that was the part of the larger discussion there. And this comes back to us also in the Yoga of Knowledge. There's a division, there's a clear division between two things. But now we need to name those two things. We need to understand what those two things really are. And he gives you a series of names, terms, which have been developed over in different traditions or different approaches. Now, he's not giving you a historical survey. He is not going to tell you, these people called it that, those people called it that. That doesn't matter. You call it by any name, it doesn't change it. But if you go deep into it, you will find there are different ways of looking at these two things. And those names are important because there are different ways of looking at it. And he will give you 3 different ways of looking at it, which traditionally have been named in certain ways, but conceptually are different. And so it's important to understand what is the conceptual difference between these things. First, he says, the Vedantins. No, sorry, we've missed a line. This division, Purusa and Prakriti, this division was made most clearly by the old Indian philosophies. It was made by other traditions also. You will find similar things in the Greek traditions, but it is not made so clearly, and the exploration of the depth of these two in the duality is not as complete. So he will draw now from the Indian tradition for these. But it bases itself upon the eternal fact of practical duality in unity, upon which the world manifestation is founded. This is a practical fact. Whether you accept it or not, this is so. That the whole manifestation of the world is built on a certain duality. Sri Aurobindo has brought the discussion now to a fundamental problem of life and of our existence. And that is, what is it that we are in our experience as a soul, and what is its relationship with what is in our experience, nature. And so the whole chapter is titled, The Soul and Nature. It will be useful to recall what is the context for this discussion. You will remember In the previous chapter titled Oneness, Sri Aurobindo had described how our experience of Satchidananda has to take on the practical form of experiencing the oneness of the divine in all the levels of our consciousness and in all the activities of our being. And the result of this integral knowledge is to gather all the different strands of our being into the universal oneness. The whole universe is one, we also, and all our relationships with all things are experienced in the oneness. But the full possession of the world from this divinized consciousness can only be had if we know everything in its absoluteness. It's not enough to say that there is a flower and I feel an experience of oneness with it. Do I know flower for its absoluteness of its divine essence? As long as we are still seeing things in parts, we belong to a lower knowledge. And to see things as the divine sees them is to see from the higher knowledge, in which, he says, the absolute is everywhere. Can we see and experience the absolute in the flower and in all things? If we have not come to that, then our possession of the world in this divinized consciousness is not yet complete. Second, he says, every finite is an infinite and has to be known and sensed in its intrinsic infiniteness as well as in its surface finite appearance. So take any object which is finite, as all things in the universe are, and yet he says it is an infinite. We can only see the finite appearance. Can we experience its infiniteness also? And if we cannot, then our possession of the world in the divinized consciousness is not yet complete. We should be able to not only experience that infinity of all things, but also know its finite appearance so that you can relate to it in its surfaces as necessary. You have the famous incident of the disciple who is given by the Guru a premature awakening of the Brahman consciousness, and he is overwhelmed by this oneness or infinity of the Brahman consciousness, and he runs around shouting, everything is Brahman. And as he ends up on the road, there is an elephant approaching, and he starts shouting, elephant, you are Brahman, I am Brahman, world is Brahman. And the Mahut says, hey crazy fellow, get away from me. And the fellow says, no, you don't understand, you are Brahman, I am Brahman. And so the Mahut nudges the elephant, and the elephant picks up the disciple and throws him. Bruised and in pain, he goes back to his Guru and says, but I thought everything is Brahman, how did this happen? And the Guru says to him, well, there is also elephant Brahman and Mahut Brahman, and you should be able to relate to them in their own finite appearances also. So Sri Aurobindo very carefully formulates these words. Every finite is an infinite and has to be known and sensed in its intrinsic infiniteness as well as its surface finite appearance. And only when you have the full spectrum of its reality that you can relate to it perfectly as necessary on all levels. And why is this important? When this experience is complete, he says at that point we have a divine vision, divine sense, divine ecstasy in the experience of union of ourselves with the objects of our consciousness. And the result of that is each thing becomes to us our self, God, the absolute and infinite Satchidananda. The benefit of this completeness is that you have the secret of complete delight in God's world, complete satisfaction of the mind and heart and will, complete liberation of the consciousness. And now everything is complete, including the satisfaction and the participation and enjoyment of the world. Anything less is incomplete. And this, Sri Aurobindo says, is the secret of that complete delight and satisfaction. It is the supreme experience also to which art and poetry and all the various efforts of knowledge and desire to possess and enjoy objects is secretly trying to arrive. And so here Sri Aurobindo puts this, what we would consider now as a high or complete experience of the divine, in the context of all the existing efforts to grow in knowledge and in possession and enjoyment of the world. What do you do with art and poetry? You are trying to glimpse something beautiful or an aspect of enjoyment, greater or lesser, and trying to give it an expression. The attempt essentially is to be able to enjoy, to possess, and to know more deeply everything. And so all these efforts, however rudimentary, however crude, are pointing towards this experience. And what he's saying is, when we approach this experience, all of art, all of poetry, all attempts to know, to desire, to possess, to enjoy, are fulfilled in this. This is so important because in the way the human being is formed, we are always dissatisfied with anything which falls short. I enjoy this, I enjoy more, but if only I could enjoy completely and perfectly. And anything that falls short leaves a gap of something possible but unreachable, leading to a frustration or dissatisfaction. And there is such a thing possible, that you can have the most complete, not the most, the complete experience of delight in God's world, complete satisfaction of mind, heart and will, at the same time being in a complete liberation of consciousness. And it will fulfill all these efforts of the human struggle, including all the art and poetry and attempts to know and seize and experience the world. Now, you see how important this experience is and how it relates to the current human effort. If you look at the big picture, what is obvious is every effort at art and poetry, every effort to know, to grow, to be able to master your circumstances, to be able to better enjoy your world, every effort is pointing towards this. In other words, no effort is fulfilled unless it reaches this eventually. Think of it this way, unknowingly, everybody in the world is struggling to realize this. Unknowingly, therefore, everybody will eventually approach this. The difference only is whether you do it consciously or unconsciously. And this is the ultimate, the acme of the satisfaction that is intended for us. The absolute satisfaction and sense of illumination which it gives and alone can give is proof of its validity, he says. We get by that a ray from the higher consciousness and the divine sense into which our subjective being is intended eventually to be transfigured, if we will only allow it. So eventually all of this movement of human struggle is meant to reach this, if only we will allow it, meaning somewhere inside we are unintentionally preventing this from happening. And so this begins the discussion of the chapter proper. What is this duality of Purusa and Prakriti, which has been in the earlier part of the synthesis of yoga, has been touched upon. We have not really studied it in our classes, but we are all familiar with the concept. There is a status of consciousness which is observer, and then there is this movement of nature, and there are two. He shows you the various philosophical perspectives of this. You can see the two as self and Maya and interpret the two, self and Maya, in two different ways. Maya as the power of the self to delude itself, or Maya as the creative power of the self, depending on the traditions. You can see them also as the Lord and his creative cosmic power. And all of these are various ways of looking at it. But he says, we must go back to the experience rather than the philosophical formulation of it. We have to go back to the experience, and in the experience we find the original psychological experience from which all these philosophies take their start, that there are two elements in the existence of living beings. Anything that's living has two elements. Of human beings at least, if not of all cosmos. So he's throwing as an aside, even if you claim that it is only in human beings and not in animals or other living beings, not in plants perhaps, at least you know it is true in human beings. But on the other extreme, it could also be everywhere in the cosmos. He leaves you that suggestion. It's not central to the discussion, but the answer to that suggestion will also be found when we find the answer to this question within the human being. So what are we? A dual being, nature and soul. What does it mean? And we start now a subjective process, an introspection where we will begin to observe what this experience is about, what is our relationship of this soul and nature internally, and then what does it lead to as a discovery, and subsequently what can we do to make that relationship, well, complete or true in what it should be. So he starts with, this duality is self-evident. As we are, as human beings, we can experience it without needing anyone to show us anything. Without any philosophy at all. By the mere force of experience, it is what we can all perceive, although we may not take the trouble to define. In practice, it takes this form. I want to do, but I'm too tired. And we experience two layers. One which wants, and one which refuses or cannot. What are these? Now he says, we don't take the trouble to define. But in the experience, we're experiencing this double turn. I am so happy, but something. I am sad, but always there is something else which is a but against my internal awareness, which I am conscious of. Even within my awareness, I can begin to find a further refinement of the duality. I am happy or I am sad, but I don't want to be sad. Interesting. I am able to separate from what I thought was me and take a stance which is further behind. I don't want to be sad, but I am unable to get free of the sadness. Who is the person that does not want to be sad? Who is the person struggling against that which prevents it? What is the thing which prevents it from being free of the sadness? I'm feeling depressed. I don't want to be depressed, but I'm unable to pull myself out. What is this I that feels it can be free? It knows it can be free, knows it has the right to be free, and is struggling to pull itself out. And from what is it trying to pull itself out? What is it in that which binds it, compels it, prevents it from being free? And there is always this double awareness. Even in my more refined parts, I can stand back and observe that there is a part of my awareness which is actually free, while another part which is struggling. So I'm struggling to be free of my sadness, but there is a part in me that observes the struggle to be free. And if I'm very careful, I notice this part is already free. Interesting. And so we discover an ability to be able to separate out in layers and layers, but eventually coming to some kind of an essential awareness. So even the most thoroughgoing materialism which denies the soul or resolves it into a more or less illusory result of natural phenomena acting upon some ill-explained phenomenon of the physical brain, which we call consciousness or the mind, but which is really no more than a sort of complexity of nervous spasms, cannot get rid of the practical fact of this duality. Now we can take the most extreme materialist position, and even then we will not be able to get free of this practical duality. And what is the most extreme position? The materialism which denies soul or resolves it into a more or less illusory result of natural phenomena acting upon some ill-explained phenomenon of the physical brain, which we call consciousness or mind. What is soul? It is just your experience of consciousness or your experience of mind. And how is that coming? There is something happening in the natural processes by which this appears. How does it appear? Where does it appear? Why doesn't it appear everywhere? Well, it's happening somewhere inside your brain, and somehow the physical brain has this ability to produce the experience of mind or of consciousness, and that's what you call yourself or your soul. What in the physical brain is able to produce this, which we do not find anywhere else? You do not experience it in the head, for example. Well, science says some phenomenon is taking place in the physical brain I can't quite explain, or I'm able to explain but only partially. So earlier the explanation was very simple. You have so many neurons which are sending out electrical signals, and the number of neurons is really huge. And all these electrical signals somehow in a complex interplay create for the awakening of your consciousness or mind. Somehow. And there's always this gap of a somehow. And the pursuit of neurobiology or neuropsychology or artificial intelligence, coming from a very different angle of computers, is precisely to find out how this somehow happens. And always we find we are able to imitate certain elements of intelligence, certain behavior of consciousness, but we fall short of something more essential which consciousness of the human being has, but your artificial intelligence does not have. Something always falls short. So we say in these fields of exploration that we have actually solved the problem, only we are limited by our capacity to replicate the brain's complexity. My computers are too slow, they don't have enough memory, or they are still too limited by the technology. That's what we have been saying for the last 40 years. And interestingly, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, in the 1970s, early 70s, when a computer was the size of a big refrigerator and had less computing power than your ordinary cheapest mobile phone. In those days, they said, if we had to replicate the human brain to be able to produce the phenomenon of consciousness or mind, we would have to make a computer which would be as big as the moon. And that's why we can't replicate it, because it's just a technological problem of numbers. Now, as we have subsequently gone on, every 2 years, our computing power has doubled. So going back over 40 years, you can imagine how much the computing power has increased. And with that, at the same time, parallelly, our understanding of the brain's working has also increased. So with the complexity of our understanding of brain's working, we have come to a new conclusion, that the brain is so complex that with all the new computing power that we have, if we had to replicate the brain's appearance of consciousness or mind, the new computers with their faster capabilities would have to be as big as the moon. So somehow it seems the closer we get to an understanding of the phenomenon of consciousness, the more it seems to elude us, suggesting that perhaps it is not merely a product of brain processes. In fact, there are entire fields of psychological exploration and even parapsychological exploration which prove without doubt that the mind is not a product of the brain. The fact that you can project your mind beyond the brain or physical senses, project it at a distance on the other side of the earth, project it to other planets, see and experience things and describe them accurately, is proof that the mind is not a product of the brain, and the mind is fundamentally free of the brain. And just that would be enough to break down all the assumptions of current neuroscience. But in practice, because this is so damaging to the existing models, such phenomena, parapsychological phenomena, are kept aside. They are not considered mainstream science, even though they demonstrate their evidence using all the tools of mainstream science. Science itself is split into those who accept consciousness is independent and those who see consciousness merely as phenomena. It does not matter at all how it came about. The fact is not only there, it determines our whole existence. It is the one fact which is really important to us as human beings with a will and an intelligence and a subjective existence which makes all our happiness and our suffering. So he is coming now to the crux. Forget your explanations. What is your subjective experience and how important is it? We cannot get rid of the fact that there is this duality, and it is the one thing which is really important as human beings, with a will and an intelligence and subjective existence. If you didn't have will, intelligence and subjective existence, it wouldn't matter. My computer is programmed to do what it has to do. A sophisticated artificial intelligence is still programmed to do what it has been programmed to do and will keep doing only that. I, on the other hand, have this experience of a conscious will. I believe I can exercise a choice. And then it becomes a critical factor. What is this part which is conscious and can exercise a choice? And against what is it struggling when it is trying to exercise the choice? I have an intelligence. And as an intelligence, I am able to look at processes of nature by standing back from them, being essentially free of them, and being able to transcend them to override and change. And this is what makes me human and makes my human life meaningful. If I did not have this ability, if I was merely a victim of all the nature's processes, then I would not be human. My essential humanity has this choice, this freedom, and it's important because my intelligence rests on utilizing this freedom and my willpower depends on this. And finally, the third aspect of it, I have an internal subjective life. In the human being, we have a subjective existence which makes all our happiness and our suffering. And somehow this subjective existence is dependent on who I am and what my relationship is with this nature, which is not I, against which I have to struggle. So all of this points to the fact that this question and the duality, this determines our whole existence. It is the one fact which is really important to us as human beings, with a will and an intelligence and a subjective existence which makes all our happiness and our suffering. So now we need to explore this problem. And the journey of exploration is going to be subjective. We're not looking at any philosophies. What do you experience in yourself? Sri Aurobindo writes, the whole problem of life resolves itself into this one question. And now he will write the question in quotation marks. I will read the whole question and then we will look at all of its components. What are we to do with this soul and nature set face to face with each other? This nature, this personal and cosmic activity, which tries to impress itself upon the soul, to possess, control, determine it. And this soul, which feels that in some mysterious way, it has a freedom, a control over itself, a responsibility for what it is, and does, and tries therefore to turn upon nature, its own and the world's, and to control, possess, enjoy, or even, it may be, reject and escape from her. End quotation. So this is the big question. The way he formulates the question is, what are we to do with this soul and nature set face to face with each other? Question mark. This is the question itself. But within the question, he is describing all the component aspects of the question. After all, if you ask a fundamental question, the fundamental question cannot be so important unless it had many internal facets to it. So what are these facets? And again, it's purely a question of subjective introspection. So the first part of the question is, what are we to do with this soul and nature? They are there. Now what do I do? I can only know what I can do if I know what is their relationship and what is possible in that relationship. So now we go deeper into it. Set face to face with each other. They are facing each other as if each is pushing or attempting to dominate upon the other. They are face to face. If they were both facing the same direction, perhaps there would not be a problem. But since they are facing each other, each trying to do its thing, somehow ends up eating into the freedom of the other, eating into the territory of the other and its reality. And the moment this becomes active, it overwhelms the other. If that becomes active, it overwhelms this. They are facing each other. What do we do about it? Now we look deeper into the question. To be able to understand what to do about these two facing each other, we have to look at what they are each trying to do. So first he describes nature. This nature. This personal and cosmic activity. So nature with a capital N, he looks at two levels. Personal and cosmic. In both cases it is the same activity. And the question now extends itself to both aspects, personal nature as well as cosmic nature. So when we now begin to look at examples, we will look at both. But essentially we will discover the personal nature and the cosmic nature are not really different. They are only different in scope. My personal nature is a part of cosmic nature, and somehow whatever issues I have with cosmic nature eventually find their way to be represented in my personal nature. Or, more interestingly, any issues I have with my personal nature eventually find their representation in the cosmic working. Because they are really one or two aspects of the same one. So if I find in myself, in my nature there is a rigidity, then looking out into the cosmos, I discover that rigidity everywhere. If in my nature there is a narrowness, I look out and I find the same narrowness everywhere. Or equally, if I look out into the cosmos and I say, this world is a domain of suffering, I find in my nature also I am trapped in a bundle of suffering. Oh, this world is so exciting and fascinating, there's so many things to discover, and I look into my own nature and I say, my God, in my own nature there's so much to discover. It's a continuum, really. And yet, in the relationship of the two, there's a huge difference. When I begin to explore my own nature, the whole exploration is subjective. I find that every time that I eat this food, my energy levels are higher. But it doesn't apply to everybody. I find every time that I expose myself to these particular kinds of thoughts or emotions, I find myself depleted of energy. But it's not quite the same with others. For them, it's a different pattern. So there's a subjective element to this, and then there are common elements which are part of the objective. And the objective exploration is what we do when we try to dive into the ocean, observe the working of nature and the complexity and interdependence of the climate, explore outer space, etc. The exploration of inner space is fundamentally different subjectively as an experience. So we are looking at two facets of nature. One is personal nature and the other is cosmic activity, but commonly both are activity. So this nature, this personal and cosmic activity, which tries to impress itself upon the soul. And now we are looking at the relationship. What is this nature doing? Tries to impress itself upon the soul. And what are the nuances of this impressing? To possess, to control, determine it. Poor soul. Nature is always trying to somehow impress itself upon the soul. And on the other side, what happens with the soul? And this soul, which feels that in some mysterious way it has a freedom, a control over itself, a responsibility for what it is and does, and tries therefore to turn upon nature, its own nature and the world, and to control, possess, enjoy. Now, look at again the two movements. Nature wants to impress itself upon the soul, but the soul feels in some mysterious way it has a freedom and control over itself. So this is the first level of the struggle. Then we will look at the nuances of the struggle. In the first level, nature is trying to impress, and the soul feels it has control over itself and therefore does not want to be controlled by nature. So the pressure of nature is somehow warping you. And how? Impress upon the soul, to possess, control, determine it. The movement of nature is literally possessing you, grabbing you and making you from inside out what it wants. Second, it controls you. Having possessed you from inside, it begins to control you. And third, it determines your identity and existence. The sequence is very important, because when you look at the other sequence of the soul's response, it turns upon nature and tries to control, possess and enjoy. Now we'll see the sequence why it is so important. There's a difference. First, nature is possessing, controlling and determining, and soul is controlling, possessing and enjoying. What is the difference between possessing and controlling? So we see the sequences reversed between soul and nature. Nature first possesses you. Who am I? I am this body. I cannot say that I have a body to begin with. I am the body. I am my emotions. I am my thoughts. Nature has already invaded and possessed my identity. Take away my body, I won't exist. Take away my emotions or my thoughts, I won't exist. Nature possesses me completely. And having possessed, having become the substance of my existence, she then begins to control. I cannot help it, my body is unable to eat this food and digest it. My temperament of emotions is temperamentally trusting or distrusting. My way of thinking is by nature such or the other. So the control of my thoughts, emotions and lifestyle is coming from the very possession that nature has already made. And as a result, when I have a series of patterns which nature has controlled and formed, she has determined my identity. I am this bundle of habits of likes and dislikes. I cannot be otherwise. A determination is set. So you see, nature enters and seizes your material. From inside, the material itself, although flexible, puts up preferences. And those preferences eventually harden to determine your identity. Now, if you have allowed this process to happen, I am nothing other than this toy created by nature. Modern science, because it has seen things from the nature's perspective and seen soul as a product of nature in that extreme materialism, will therefore say that you are the product of your genes, of your environmental influences, of the food that you eat, and the conditioning which has been imprinted upon you. That is you. And if I can tweak these things, I can determine what you are. And the entire educational system of the industrial age was built on this idea. If we can tweak these processes of training, we can design a person to become a good citizen, or a soldier, or an inventor, or an artist, or whatever else, because it's finally raw material. As they went deeper into it, they discovered no, in each child there seems to be material which they cannot fully control, which seems to push back even in their attempt to control. And then they tied it to heredity. Oh, because your heredity makes you inclined this way, you behave that way. And so we have to work within the limitations of your heredity. And still, in spite of that, we discover in a family of certain hereditary types, one child which is completely different. And so rather than being able to explain it, we just dismiss it as, well, either within hereditary there are uncontrolled phenomena which are freak, unexplainable. Basically saying, we don't know. But something pops up which breaks this assumption. So, if you give in to nature's processes, it seems as if everything could be predestined. But we discover there are things which do not give in to nature's processes and push back at all three levels. If nature is trying to possess you and becomes your material, you can change your material. Very physically, the food you eat. If the food you eat has a dulling effect and makes your body lazy, makes your mind and emotions dull and uncreative, you can change the type of food that you eat. And therefore change the way nature possesses you. And make yourself lighter, freer, and so on. Even if it is an impulsion of external cosmic nature pushing on me to try to force me to do something, I have a control to modify it. Or at least I feel that. So if I have freedom, I have control over what? Myself. Because I am free over myself, not over nature. I can choose to be free. So, in some mysterious way, it has a freedom and a control over itself. And if it has a control, then the third implication is it has a responsibility for what it is and does. If I can control, then certainly I should not be a nasty person. I should not do something which is nasty because I have the freedom. If I was merely a product of my biological processes, then it doesn't matter. You turn upon nature and tries therefore to turn upon nature, its own and the world's, again 2 levels of influence. Change what my body is pushing on me, what my thoughts are pushing on me. Change also what society or the nature of the world is compelling me to do. And so you push back. And how does the pushback take place? To control, possess, enjoy. And even it may be reject and escape from her. So the reject and escape is like the complement of control, possess and enjoy, but it's an alternative also. Let's look at how these work and the sequence here. Control. You don't possess nature. Nature is much more than you. You are at best a point of awareness. What can you do? You can tweak, push back on things, minor control influences. Increasingly, as this control grows, you feel as if you are possessing. But why are we trying to control ourselves, our nature or larger nature? To possess, and having possessed, what do you do with nature? Enjoy. The whole point of the exercise is to be able to enjoy. If I can grow the flower in my garden, I will have a perfumed garden, which I can enjoy. If I can make my bed more comfortable, I can lie down and enjoy the comfort. If I can arrange my circumstances in this way, I can enjoy those circumstances. The goal always is to arrange nature or rearrange nature in a way that you can enjoy nature. Why is it we're trying to do that? It seems to be somewhere deep inside us, inherently the deep need to enjoy. And the need itself uses the fact that you have a freedom and the ability to control what you are and what you do. We look at the big sentence. What are we to do with this soul and nature? Question mark. This is the big sentence. Into this, what are we to do with this soul and nature set face to face with each other? Into this it describes this nature, this personal and cosmic activity which tries to impress itself upon the soul, to possess, control, determine it. And this soul, which feels that in some mysterious way it has a freedom, a control over itself, a responsibility for what it is and does, and tries therefore to turn upon nature, its own and the world's, and to control, possess, enjoy, or even it may be reject and escape from her. But in all this description, what he has mapped out is all of the tendencies of this relationship of nature and soul. Now, we touched upon this briefly last time. We realized that ultimately there is no way to separate the two, to have one of them only. You cannot just be soul, there will always be nature. You cannot just have nature, there will always be soul. So while you may separate them to the most extreme, you can never separate them beyond a point. They're always together. They're as if tied to each other. One cannot exist without the other, but always present one for the other. You remove soul, nature will cease to be, because there is no one to observe or enjoy. You have nature, it means there is a soul which is observing or enjoying. You remove nature, soul cannot exist without some sense of beingness, reference to itself. Or in some traditions will say soul can exist, nature is as if withdrawn into soul, ceases to be. Perhaps. But when you open your eyes or when the rock hits your face, well, you realize nature is out there. You cannot pretend it doesn't exist. So at the end of the day, the two are always together, neither can exist without the other. So what are we to do with this soul and nature? This is the big question, which is the most important for the human being. In order to answer the question, which is going to be the rest of the discussion of the chapter, in order to answer that question, Sri Aurobindo writes, we have to know. Then he puts a dash. To know what the soul can do, to know what it can do with itself, to know too what it can do with nature and the world. But it's interesting, Sri Aurobindo doesn't say, in order to answer that question, we have to know what the soul can do and what it can do with nature. He first says, in order to answer that question, we have to know. Pause, dash. And he is elaborating what we have to know. But essentially, the problem is resolved only if we can begin to know. The more deeply we know, the more completely we know, the more we have the answer to this question, which is complete. In that knowing, there are three facets. The first facet is to know what the soul can do. Second, to know what it can do with itself. You see, there's a difference. To know what I can do and to know what I can do with myself. They're different things. And to know too what it can do with nature and the world. This is very subtle. Why Sri Aurobindo bothers to state these very subtle ideas? Each of these is an exploration in itself. And before we get into this, the value of this knowing, he says, the whole of human philosophy, religion, science is really nothing but an attempt to get at the right data upon which it will be possible to answer the question and solve as satisfactorily as our knowledge will allow the problem of our existence. Remember earlier we saw, he discussed how all the world's art, poetry and all the efforts to knowledge and the desire to enjoy and effort to act are pointing towards this highest divine experience. And now he's saying, with regard to this particular relationship of soul and nature, whole of human philosophy, religion and science is only an attempt to get at the right data upon which we can answer this question. Now these three fields of exploration which he has mentioned, philosophy, religion and science, are each approaching the same question but from a different angle. Science approaches it from a much more material and objective means. Philosophy observes it from a more rational and subjective means. Religion approaches it much more from the feeling of the heart's recognition and an intuition. the foundations on which these three approaches are based are different. And although they all three approach the same question, they therefore view it differently. But none of these three in itself can give you the complete understanding, because each has a limited starting point and bias of its starting point. But all three together can give you the most complete experience or knowledge, which would allow you, giving you the right data upon which it is possible to answer the question and solve as satisfactorily as our knowledge will allow the problem of our existence. If your knowledge is limited, you will have solved to that limitation. If your knowledge is complete, you will have solved it to that completeness. Well, the whole of the rest of the chapter is going to be about this. But in these three, which he has placed before, philosophy, religion and science, Sri Aurobindo has given an indication, a pointer to a deeper discussion. And maybe next time we will look at that deeper discussion. In one of the essays, Sri Aurobindo writes how these three fields of exploration of this question take turns in history. If you look at the journey of Western civilization, during the phase of the Greek culture, the question was approached from the angle of philosophy. Thinking objectively, rationally, thinking to figure out what's the whole answer to this problem of our existence. Later it gave way to a religious resolution, and the religion formulated it in terms which were irrational. But some elements of it which were more intuitive and emotional gave the heart some juice of satisfaction. And after that, in a reaction to the limitations and irrationality of religion, came science, which approached the whole thing objectively and rationally. While philosophy was subjective and rational, science became objective, rational and reductionist to matter. It also attempted to answer this question, and to whatever extent it could, it did, until its failure became too evident. And what you see today is the breakdown of the satisfaction that science has given, and a turn again to something subjective, and a subjective resolution to the problem, which is described as postmodernism, where each one in what they feel is right in what they feel. Even if what you feel is different from what I feel and they collide in their formulation, I have to accept that you are right in your feeling irrespective of what I feel. And somewhere that's not satisfying either. If we continue in this path long enough, eventually we will have a dissatisfaction and a rejection of this and an attempt to get something else back, which will be either philosophy or religion. And you see today the resurgence of religious forms in many spaces, but now the religion has to satisfy the demand of science and rationality. It has to satisfy the philosophical foundation also, which is not forgotten. And so Sri Aurobindo says you move across these three. Again and again one of these will dominate, the other two will subside, and then one of these will dominate. And the three together, assisting each other, make for the gradual evolutionary awakening of our knowledge and our deeper understanding and appreciation of the problem of our existence, as much as the knowledge grows, through these three facets of approach. All of this will take us through a deeper understanding of the relationship of soul and nature and of their true being. And we will discover eventually that both are expressions of the Satchidananda, and therefore this duality will resolve itself into the underlying oneness which was discussed earlier. Now once this resolution takes place, this is the logic of the whole discussion, once this resolution takes place, you are then able to perceive all things in nature and glimpse the underlying absolute and infinity, while still not losing sight of the superficial form and limits. And then you are able to enjoy and experience everything as expression of Satchidananda, and then live in complete delight in God's world and complete satisfaction of mind, heart and will, while still being in a complete liberation of consciousness. Everything is coming back to that experience which we have to get to. But we are looking at first the principles on which this whole universe is formed, And in each principle, we are discovering the underlying oneness, and through that, it's as if we awaken to this experience, which is our destiny eventually. That's the big picture we step back to. And we can pause here for a minute.